Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our session this morning on Azure AD Connect and making it simple to connect your on-premises directories to the cloud. My name is Jen Field. I'm one of the program managers that works up at Microsoft in Redmond, and I work where I sit specifically is the Azure or the ADFS team, Active Directory Federation Services. But my job for the last couple of years is I work very closely with the Azure AD team on helping make these scenarios easier for moving to the cloud, and specifically on something called Azure AD Connect. And then my colleague Andreas is here as well.
Hi, so I'm Andreas Kjellman. I'm also program manager in the same team as Jen. I'm focusing on anything synchronization engine related, and I've been doing it for a while, so FIM, ILM, MIS, MMS has been me in the past 12 years. So you might have seen me in one of these events before.
Yes, Andreas
All right,
is our
back to Jen.
expert. Okay, thank you. So just a little intro to what you'll be seeing in the session today. We're going to start with a little bit of a scenario view and a broader story, but we're going to take it down to specifics very quickly for you and show you some specific things. We're going to show you 3 demos. One of them is going to be very simple, quick, and easy to show you how you can get your customers or your organizations up and running very simply. And then we're going to show you a second demo that's very long and shows you a lot of advanced options with slides along the way to let you know what's going on behind the scenes. And then finally, we're going to show you something called Azure AD Connect Health, which is a newer, relatively new component that we're introducing to help assess the status of connection. So let's go ahead and get started. So starting broadly, empower enterprise mobility. That's a big promise, right? What do we mean by that? And what we specifically mean is enabling our users, your users, to sign on and do the work they need to do, get access to the things they need access to from anywhere and from any device, but with the amount of control that we need to ensure that the right checks are in place to make sure the right things happen and the wrong things don't. So I've seen, looking through the sessions over the week and demos that we've had, we're about halfway through the week now, I've seen many examples of these scenarios and capabilities, everything from doing information protection and threat analytics based on users and devices to a lot of conditional access scenarios where we're allowing things like Android devices, iPads, iPhones, and Windows devices to access the network resources they need to access, but checking them for things like health and compliance and whether they're up to date, and applying additional multiple factors of authentication, or MFA, in scenarios deemed high risk enough to warrant that. So the whole idea is we're letting people do the work they need to do. We're not overburdening them with excessive prompts for authentication and checks, but we are aware of the risk of the access scenarios and letting people do what they need to do. So that in mind, we have one depiction of one way to enable enterprise mobility. And I think you've seen maybe this slide a couple other times before this week. It's intentionally chaotic, but this is what we're seeing right now in a lot of our organizations we've been speaking to in the industry. So what's happening here is everybody is independently logging into, enrolling and logging into everything from everywhere, and there's not a lot of visibility to what's going on, and there's very little control. Okay, so today we want to talk to you about a different way of doing that. So we have, as we know, our on-premises identities. We've got users in Active Directory and non-Active Directory identity stores. We've got devices, domain-joined computers. And then we have the cloud and all of these resources, Office 365, SaaS apps, et cetera. And then we have this thing called Microsoft Azure Active Directory. And what is that, and what does that provide? Well, Azure Active Directory provides the identity foundation for all of these cloud scenarios, Office 365, SaaS apps, different apps that your organization develops or that you develop or that you deploy to the cloud, and even including such things as apps you might have previously deployed on an image across desktops across the organization that now will be available in Azure through Azure Remote App. And even apps that are still on-prem through AD Application Proxy can be proxied, accessed, and brokered through Microsoft Azure Active Directory. So it's a pretty powerful foundation. But the first and foremost things that it does is enable these key foundational identity services, right? So of course you've got sign-on. I sign on on-prem, I sign on in the cloud. It's the same credentials, right? Pretty basic. And then self-service and management of the core identity as a service capabilities. Users, groups, devices, passwords, they can be set, reset, changed, created from either place on-prem and in the cloud, and everything is kept consistent across the entire fabric. And then finally, over here on the left, you have this thing called simple connection, and that's one of the things we're going to be talking to you about today, because that's one of the key things we do with Azure AD Connect. That creates the connection from your on-premises directories so that you can power all these scenarios using on-prem identities. So with that,
enters Azure Active Directory Connect. So we said that we is all about being able to onboard what you have on-premises and make sure you have that in the cloud. And when we say on-premises, we have Active Directories, been there for years and years and years. But you probably have other things like LDAP directory, SQL servers with identity information, and we want to make sure we can live in a hybrid environment. And when we said hybrid, that is the end state for most of our customers. You are going to have identities on-premises, you're going to have identities in the cloud, but you only want to manage them in one single place. Doing dual administration is really, really hard. And certainly if you're a large customer, it just doesn't scale. So Azure Directory Connect brings together everything you need to make sure you can basically bridge together on-premises in the cloud. And we call it Identity Bridge. Well, to be honest, we stole that term from Gartner. Gartner is calling it the Identity Bridge, so do we. And what we want to do is make sure we have a one-stop shop for everything, both for synchronization, also for authentication with federation, but also new services like Jen mentioned, like AD Health. So you will see that everything coming from Microsoft in the future that is about bridging will fall under the name Azure Directory Connect, and then we are adding Azure Directory Connect Sync, Azure Directory Health, etc. What we have not on this picture is what's still on premises. So we still have the old product Forefront Identity Manager and what's upcoming Microsoft Identity Manager. That product line is still there. It's still doing identity management on premises. And it will still continue doing that. If you look at the far right-hand side, in Azure Active Directory, we also have the possibility to connect to a lot of SaaS applications. As you probably saw at the keynote, we already have 2,500 applications with federation from Azure Active Directory to systems such as Salesforce, etc. So that is also not part of Azure Active Directory Connect, but is part of the entire fabric to build your identity infrastructure. Today we're going to focus on the middle piece, bridging on-prem with the cloud. So let's see how easy that actually is. So let's actually go to
our first demo. Actually, do we want to do the slide first? Sorry. Jump the gun a little. Okay, so just intro to our first demo. So Azure Active Directory Connect is currently in preview mode, and it has two paths. There's an express settings, which is very simple, and custom settings, which lets you do a lot of different advanced capabilities. So what is it like to connect to the cloud today at this moment? We have Connect is still in preview. We have dir sync out there. We have AAD sync. We have ADFS. We have various prerequisites for all of those things. And one thing we have right now is a lot of confusion, at least I'm hearing, customers and IT professionals and consultants even coming to me and saying, hey, what is the story here and why is this so complex? So our first and foremost goal with Connect is to bring all the tools into one tool so you have one download, whichever scenario you're trying to configure. Next is this idea of enabling people to start simple. So even if you don't have a simple one-forest environment, maybe you have multiple directories, maybe you have different LDAP identity stores, but we give you the ability to start simple and then grow from there. So you can go through the wizard once. You don't have to go and read these hundreds of pages of documentation necessarily that we have out there. Now, if you're interested and you're a deep dive professional and you want to know all those things, absolutely, we have that content out there for you. But if you just want to get up and going, this tool set, a new set of tools and capabilities lets you do that. And then finally, if you want to enable custom options, you can go down the custom path for things like multiple directories, pilot mode, and et cetera, that we'll be showing you a lot more today. So let's get to the simple demo first. So here's my virtual machine. And OK, so I have an MSI, which is Azure Active Directory Connect. How did I get this? Well, most likely, once we go GA, you will have installed this from the Azure AD portal. And then subsequent to that, we'll also be pointing to it from the Office 365 portal, basically every place that you would find dir sync today. And so there's a little download procedure. You run the MSI, and you say, hey, welcome to Azure Active Directory Connect. So let's go and press the green button here. And so here we have express settings, not a new concept in software. We've just bundled the most frequent, common, simple options that people generally would like to have into very, very few clicks. So this is basically going to ask me for 2 sets of credentials, and that's it. On-prem credentials and cloud credentials. And then it's going to configure sync with the password sync option. Which sync is it going to configure? Well, the latest and greatest sync engine, which is always going to be delivered via Azure AD Connect. So it's not DirSync, it's not even previous versions of AAD Sync. It's the latest with the latest capabilities. So I'm going to go ahead and click the green button. And already it's installing the prerequisites that I need on my box to make this work. So I'm going to go ahead and connect to Azure AD. These are my Azure AD credentials. And these are my actual tenant, so it has my name. And then my password. And we're going to log in. OK. So here we are. And I have my on-premise credentials. Now we ask you for enterprise admin credentials on-prem in the express settings path. That's because we go and we create everything for you. We update the ACLs you need in AD. We give you your user rights assignment for password sync, et cetera. So I'm going to go ahead and give those. By the way, in custom path, you don't need to have these. My password is. OK. And then that's literally all I had to give the wizard. And so now I'm ready to go ahead and kick it off. And this has been taking about 1 minute and 45 seconds to set up as it goes out to the cloud. So I'm going to click the green button and then tell you what this page said. So all it gives is a little more information about specifically what we are enabling in the environment right now. So those of you familiar with Sync know we have connectors. So it sets up the AD connector to the local forest, as well as the connector to Azure AD, and the sync service is configured on the local box. We don't yet support, I feel like I'm going in and out. We don't yet support deploying config or deploying sync remotely, so that'll you'll always be wanting to run this on your sync server, on the server you intend to be your sync server. And then we go in and we enable password sync, so that you should be able to log in with on-prem credentials. Basically, if you have a test user or a set of small users in your environment, right away. One additional thing that's new in Sync is that we used to use the global admin cloud credentials you give us as your ongoing Sync credentials. And this was not a very good story. We heard a lot of feedback because from a least privileges perspective, you want to be having your ongoing operations go with lower privileges than that. So one of the new things we do is we actually go and create a Sync user in the cloud that will be the ongoing Sync user. And that user has a specific role. It's not global admins. It is directory sync users or something like that. It's very specific to just the Sync users themselves. And then this goes along. It's a couple more seconds. You can see it cycling through the things that it was doing. And this is the last step. OK. So that's it. I'm complete. And so I'm now able to go ahead and log in to Azure AD. I now have a hybrid deployment. Now, there was an additional option I didn't speak to before, Exchange Hybrid Mode. You can optionally set that up. That's been around for a while, so that if you need coexistence between on-prem and cloud mailboxes, we'll set that up for you in Express settings, too. But let's go ahead, as a final step on this demo, and log in. So I have here the portal. And I know that I had a user on-prem in my Active Directory. So I named very creative name, test user 1. And then I had a password. Oh, fear not. There is a little bit of propagation time in the cloud. So this is a expected thing. I'm just going to give it a couple more minutes and check if we are done here. And I have no internet. Oh, I do now. OK. So let me go ahead and refresh this guy. And here we go. So we're in. So it didn't take very long, and now signed into the cloud. So next, I think I'm going to hand it back to Andreas.
All right, great. Thank you. So that was the Express settings, and it really showed you what we used to call DirSync. So let me explain all the different tools and what we have today. So today, as you probably know, we have DirSync. DirSync is still a product that is available through the Office 365 portal and Azure portal and that is still a default tool for all our single forest deployments. But Express settings, as Jen just demonstrated, is going to replace DirSync. So if you wanted the DirSync experience, you just click Express Set, you get exactly the same thing. We also have Azure Active Directory Sync. It's been out since September of last year, and that is handling more complex scenarios, it's handling multi-forest scenarios, and that is what I'm going to show you next, and that is a customized path of Azure Active Directory Connect, where you could do a lot more things. But also, we had a solution that's been out for FIM, so we have an Azure Active Directory connector for Forefront Identity Manager. That one is also as a solution going away and going to be replaced with Azure Active Directory Connect. FIM is still going to be there for on-premises, as I said earlier, but for onboarding to the cloud, it's going to be one story. It's going to be Azure Active Directory Connect for everything. Also, today, ADFS is its own thing, so to speak. You need to read the 100 pages documentation to get it up and running. And as we'll show you shortly, we are also adding ADFS configuration and installation as part of Azure Directory Connect, so you get one experience for all your configuration needs. And what we will show you the last today is the next component we are introducing, which is health. And health is basically operations and monitoring for these components. And we're going to show you how we do that with your on-premises ADFS and doing that from the cloud. So with Connect, there's a lot of things we can do in the customized path, and there's a lot of things. And just, rather than just talking about all these things that we can do, I'm actually going to show you. So let's go back to a machine here. Yeah. So this is Azure Directory Connect. I'm going to run exactly the same wizard again, but this time I'm going to go down the customized path, and we're going to look at all the different checkboxes and knobs and settings you can do so you know what they're all doing. So it's not a surprise when you see them. And of course, I'm going to agree to the license terms, and this time I'm not going to go Express, I'm going to do Customize. And here I can do a lot more things. So the first option is for the synchronization engine itself. With Express, we just give you the local DB, but you didn't have any options. But now I have a lot of options here. So I can, if I don't want to install it on C:, I want on D:, I can specify that. If I have an existing SQL server that is on a remote box on a special instance, I can do that. If I have a service account I want to use, it could be by default, we create a service account on the local box. But it might be you want a domain. You can pre-create the account and enter that information. Groups, if you know the sync engine, we have the admins groups, operators groups. Again, if you want to rename that, you can do that directly from the wizard. And something I'm going to talk about at the end, which is the ability to import a configuration. And I'm going to come back to this option when I'm talking about upgrading from DirSync. So just remember that there is an option here, and we will later going to use this option. In my demo, I'm just going to keep the default. It will install the local DB, and everything should be just fine. Okay. That was not good. Do you have, okay, so let's go to the backup. Sorry? I had another box checked. I think it's because I am running two versions of the same thing. 1 second.
You just have to clear out the state.
1 second. I ask you to clear that.
Delete. Okay, and then this.
Sorry for that.
There's our cool new option to hide that stuff.
Oh, there we go. And then I'm just going to switch box here.
Yeah.
Isn't it good to always have 3 backups machines?
Yes, it is. Here. All right, so.
Okay
with touchpad?
Yes, I love the touchpad. All right, so let's try this machine. Click install. I click install. There we go. All right, so user sign in. So this gives me an option to actually decide which options I want to use. So we can still use password synchronization, which is what you get in the Express path. I can select to do federation with ADFS. That is what I'm going to use today. There's also a third option that, I don't want to configure it. It could be you have an existing ADFS installation, you don't want to touch it. or it could be that you're using something like Shibboleth or some other federation provider, and you just don't want to do anything with that area. But in this case, we're actually going to use the federation option. Gosh, I could use the federation option if I can get the mouse to work with me. So I said I was using the federation option, but let me actually quickly also walk you through the decisions on why I would use one or the other. So password synchronization is a default, and if you don't know anything, we will actually recommend that. And if looking actually at our deployments, roughly 90% of our new customers going after AD-Sync and AD-Connect actually go for password synchronization. So that is the absolute most popular single sign-on option. But there are a few considerations and reasons you would use ADFS, and I've actually listed them here on the slide. So password synchronization, we got usually a lot of questions about it. Is this really safe when you say password synchronization? Well, it isn't actually the password we synchronize. We take actually the hash of the password from on-prem Active Directory. We hash the hash again, and that is what we're sending up. And since it's a hash of a hash, it's not something you can do in a replay attack, for example, because it's only Azure Active Directory you can ever use that hash. And there's also a possibility to use as a backup for federation. So even if you use ADFS, but it might be you don't have redundant data centers, etc., in that case, you can still use password synchronization under the covers. So in case of a disaster, you can actually fall back to password login at that time. All right, so let's move back to the machine.
You're on the right page now.
So it's time to connect to directories. And I'm going to connect to my contoso.com forest. As you can see here, all the forests that I have trusted shows up in the dropdown here. But in case it's a domain that's not visible because it's not trusted, I can easily type in something else here. But I'm going to use contoso.com. I'm going to use the username. So whoops. There we go. So this is supposed to be a service account. I'm a little bit lazy, so I'm using the administrator. But usually what you would do is pre-create a service account, because this is the account we'll actually use to read and write. And you probably wouldn't use the domain admin for that. But for the demo purposes, it will work just fine.
Oh.
I didn't spell contoso right.
You can make this room for you. You can have an actual mouse.
Okay. It's funny, why is the demos always possible? The most difficult thing is always just to be able to type. And it's still let it work. Away. Am I that fat-fingered? One. Click add.
There we go.
Finally.
We've added a directory, folks.
Ooh, great. All right, let's continue. All right, so this is one of the most busy slides, or actually not slides, but options. And you probably don't even see it there, so let's see if do we have Zoom it on this one? Do not. Okay. Okay, so let me just walk you through what we actually have available in this option. So at the top, there is basically trying to figure out if you're a multi-forest configuration customer, there are a few different options. And actually, let me explain with a picture instead what the different options are and what is our multi-forest options. So these are some common configurations we'll actually find with customers. The first one, you have multiple Active Directory forests on premises, and you just want to synchronize them right through. This would have been like installed 2 DIRSIGs in separate. You absolutely do not want to join the users. We also have the possibility you have like Galsync on-prem, so users in one forest, they are represented contexts in the different forests. And in this case, we obviously want to make sure we can merge the users and just represent them once up in the cloud. And in this case, we'll use the mail attribute. So if the user and contact have the same mail attribute, we're going to join them together. Finally, we have the account resource forest topology. So I have an enabled account in my account forest, and I have disabled account in my resource forest that will probably have a linked mailbox and link accounts associated with it. And that is my third option. So if we go back and look at the pages, that is actually mapping to what we have at the top here. So the first option is what I discussed. I want everything to be just flowing directly. And then I have the possibility to merge them based on mail attribute on the object seed and MS Exchange master account seed. Or, in your case, it could be something completely different. So at Microsoft, for example, we actually use extension attribute 4 because that is where we store employee ID, and that is how we are actually matching objects together. In this case, I'm going to keep the default since I only had one forest. We actually show this even if you only did one forest, and that is because this is something you cannot change. So if you just do this the first time you're adding one forest and you plan to add more forests later, you need to make sure you set this correct the first time. It cannot be changed after you set it. The bottom one is how we're going to match users with Azure Active Directory. And that also requires a little bit of explanation. So we have source anchor. The source anchor is called immutable ID in ADFS. The definition is an attribute which is immutable during the lifetime of an object. So it's something that cannot be changed. So if you created an object in Azure Active Directory, you cannot change that ever. So good attributes to pick is object GUID, which is a default. Object GUID will work fine if you're not moving users between forests. If you're moving users between forests, well, the GUID would change, wouldn't it? So in that case, you need to pick something else, like an employee ID. Really bad examples are mail and user principal name, because they are being changed if you're being married. Also, if there's an @ sign is a forbidden character. So also, if you try to get federation to work, it just won't work, because eventually we'll end up with 2 @ in the cloud and nothing will work. The other thing is user principal name. User principal name is the login ID for the users in the cloud. By default, we want you to stick with the attribute user principal name. There is a possibility, as you saw, to actually select another attribute, but in that case, you need to make sure to read the notes, because the hybrid Office 365 hybrid deployments just will not work. Outlook will not behave as it should. All right, so that was it. Let's continue to the next page. So we also have the ability to do filtering. So this is new with AD Connect, where you actually can filter on the group. So traditionally with rsync and AD Sync, we had the possibility to filter based on OUs, domains, and attributes on objects. But it's very common that you just want to do something like a pilot of 25 users, for example. And in that case, you can just create a group, just add the 25 users in all the groups, you just enter the name here, and then it's only those objects that will actually make it into Azure Active Directory. So it's an easy way to do piloting. Obviously, it can be used for other things, but it's really intended for the pilot option. So let's continue to the next page again.
This one.
And optional features. And this is actually called optional features for a reason. You don't have to do anything here on the first pass. As you see, there's a lot of options. You don't need to learn everything the first time you're running through this. You can actually completely skip this page, and it's probably a good idea, and come back into this, just relaunch your wizard and run it a second time. But there's a lot of things here, so let me actually go through them one by one. So the first option you probably know, Exchange Hybrid. You've probably seen that a lot. Azure AD App Filtering allows me to actually filter the attributes I'm going to use. So if I go down here, let's say I don't want all attributes on the users. By default, there's about 100 attributes on the user. But let's say I only want, for example, Office Pro Plus. Then what you will see is that we only take about 10 attributes for that user rather than 100. But even if I take the complete list of applications, I still have the ability to limit the list of attributes. So for example, I do not want the pager attribute. I can still unselect them if I want to. Whoops, not that far. Password sync, I still have that opportunity. As I said, password sync can be a backup for ADFS. So that is why that option is still here. I have password writeback and user writeback. And I also have a group writeback. So if I just continue on the next page, it actually gives me the ability to say, in this case, user writeback, where do I want to create these users? So what are these different options? So let me just quickly go through the writeback features. So password writeback allows the user to change and reset the password in Azure Active Directory, have it written back to on-prem Active Directory. And in those cases, we actually verify the password policy with Active Directory, so your on-prem Active Directory policy will be used rather than the policy in Azure Active Directory. User writeback allows you to create a user in Azure Active Directory. It could be through using an HR-based or cloud-based HR system, such as Workday. It would create a user in Azure Active Directory, or you use a portal to create the user, and they will write that user back to on-prem AD. We also have group writeback. This is for the new Office 365 groups. So if you're creating one of these up in Azure Active Directory and Office 365, you have the ability to write those groups back to on-prem AD so they appear in your on-prem Exchange as well. This is not for security and distribution groups yet. Security groups is something we're working on, so you can expect you'll see more of these writeback features in the future as well.
Going back to the UI?
And yes.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, I'm here. OK. And then after writeback, we also have a few device writeback. I'm going to come back to them in a minute. I'm just going to show off the final one, that is directory extensions here. So directory extensions, I'm on the wrong machine. That's why nothing is working. Let me see. Here is where I'm supposed to be. Directory extensions. So this will give me a list of all my attributes in Active Directory. And this allows me to extend the schema in Azure Active Directory with my own attributes. So for example, I have always missed the division attribute. I'll search for that one. I'm going to add it. I'm going to do the employee ID attribute. I'm going to add that one. And what it will be eventually is when I export, and you can see here I'm using graph, you can see that these attributes will appear as other attributes in Azure Active Directory. So this is actually the first way to actually extend the schema in Azure Active Directory with your own attributes and synchronize them. Wow. So there are a few gotchas, of course, with that. So as I said, this is the first time. It's not doing everything yet. You can only do it on users and groups. You cannot do it on contacts. You can only use single-valued attributes. You cannot use multi-valued attributes yet. And there's a limit, as you can read of. You can only have 100 of them, and there's a limit of them in size as well. But it's actually a possibility. Now you can actually use them in your own line of business applications, and you can start writing those very rich line of business applications. All right, so I mentioned devices. So let's talk a lot more about devices.
Yep. Just quickly back to the UI.
Oh, quickly need to go back to the UI.
Yep. And I'll take this.
And you take the clicker.
Okay.
So devices, Jen, what about them?
So, okay, a couple more checkbox options on this page talk about devices. One is device writeback, and the other one talks about Windows 10 domain computers. So let's figure out what those are talking about. Let's go back to the slides, number 5. Okay, so we have this thing called conditional access, and I think maybe some of you went to the session yesterday evening with the Intune team and Azure AD team working together to talk about conditional access for devices. But there may be some additional people in the room, so I'm going to go through that, and this will be familiar territory for those of you who saw it. So hybrid conditional access means you're enabling devices, like I said, Android, iPad, Windows, to access resources, whether they're in the cloud or on premises, based on these common conditions. And one of those things we talk about a lot is this thing called device registration. In the past, there's been Active Directory Federation Services device registration in 2012 R2, which let you do something called workplace join on-prem, kind of a light Active Directory domain join. And then now we have Azure AD domain join, where you're doing the exact same thing in the cloud. So you're making a device known to Azure AD so that it can take part in these conditional access scenarios. So what all device write-back does is write down those registered devices from Azure AD into containers in Active Directory so that they can be authenticated based on devices in ADFS and conditional access policies that you have. So conditional access policies mean that I might be preventing people who are coming from outside the extranet or from particular IP addresses from getting access until they either register their device or until they, for example, perform multi-factor authentication. And so this really completes the story of the on-prem side. And then, so those of you who saw yesterday know also that when you enroll devices or clients with Intune, now you have mobile device management, and you have that health and compliance aspect for a multitude of different things like password, PIN complexity, and jailbreak status, and are you up to date, and all these different things that comprise device health. So now what Intune is doing is writing over to Azure AD, which does the authentication, whether or not that compliance status, whether the device is compliant. So it rolls up whatever your policies are and says, hey, are you compliant or not? And then Azure AD writes that down as well. So how it looks in an authentication and access scenario is my user with his device goes to access an on-premises resource behind ADFS, and that authentication request, of course, goes over to ADFS to be authenticated. And for example, this ADFS happens to require multi-factor authentication for an unregistered device. So ADFS, and this was in 2012 R2 already, will inspect the device certificate from that user's device, and not only on the client, but in AD as well. And that's the information that was sourced from Azure AD. And then if that is found to be compliant, he's fine. If not, there is a prompt, for example, for multi-factor authentication, and then we go ahead and permit access. So that's how those actually work in an end-to-end scenario. Now, steps to configure, there are some things that we've completely enabled at this point end-to-end in the wizard, and there are some things that we're just starting to build that capability. So right now, device write-back is what we call a checkbox option, and there are different things you need to do, additional things you need to do to get it working end-to-end. We don't yet have the express settings for device registration end-to-end mode through the wizard. We're still working on that and want to have that in the future. But for now, just to let you know, there are a couple things you need to do. So enabling device registration in Azure AD is still a portal step. Maybe some of you have done that before. So you go to the portal, that's a little screenshot there, and you can see that you can either enable device registration and you can require multi-factor authentication to register a device or not. Additionally, a couple things. Clients find device registration via DNS CNAME records. So similar to the stuff you got to set up in DNS to do Office 365 or custom domains, things like that, you do have to create records that is basically your domain, enterpriseregistration.yourdomainname.com to redirect over to our namespace. So you have to create those. You run through the wizard in the custom mode, as we've been showing today. You must pre-create your sync service account. So there's an option that Andreas showed to enter that service account and not have us create it for you. You must do that for the device registration scenario. Also, you do have to have the 2012 R2 schema because you need the devices, you need Active Directory schema itself to understand the devices, and you have to create the containers. So there's like a preparatory activities in AD that you need to do to have that. And then finally, select device right back in the wizard and go ahead and join your devices to AD. So we'll have documentation for all of this. There's documents out there right now. They're not yet updated for Azure AD Connect, but we plan to do that. So you have all the steps available for you. But just so you know, we're working to make this more seamless and smoother through the wizard in our upcoming releases. OK, so that's the device registration. And then that other option you might have said something about Windows 10. Windows 10 domain-joined computers. So I'm not going to talk a lot about Windows 10 today. I'm just going to tee up a couple of things that are enabled through some new sync capabilities. If you want to learn all about Windows 10, I suggest you go on Friday to my colleague Hyro's presentation all about Windows 10 scenarios, and you can learn all about that. But just to let you know what this checkbox in our wizard is for, there are basically three new things. that we want to talk about. One is specific to ADFS in Windows Server 10. So all the scenarios I've been showing you pretty much work in down-level ADFS 2012 R2 vCurrent, but Windows Server 10 is actually going to be able to consume the is-compliant information. Today, we only, ADFS on premises can only check for is a device registered, because it's working on the old concept of just Azure AD device registration. But now with the new Intune integration, we actually can consume the MDM status of that device. Okay. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the sync option in particular that I was pointing to is that your on-premises domain-joined computers can now automatically become cloud registered devices, as well as then be written back and be on-prem registered devices. So it's no longer that you have to have two different things, domain joined and device registered. You can automatically have that for Windows 10. Now, this is you're able to do this as well for Windows 7 and Windows 8.1 clients. You always have been, but it was more of a manual process enabled by group policy, so you don't have to do that anymore. You can have it automatically through enabling the Windows 10 sync option in the wizard. And then the third thing, it's kind of a different thing, but just to let you know about new capabilities and values we're building into the sync options that we already have. You have, and you'll learn in Hyro's session, all about this new thing we have of signing on premises with a cloud Azure AD account. So I can now sign on using my cloud credentials, and it automatically signs me into Active Directory on-prem as well as AAD. And there's all sorts of new security features that we have to make that more secure. And that is enabled by some new aspects of user sync that are enabled behind the scenes for you. And that's in preview right now, so people are opting into the preview. So that's some of the new Windows Server 10 scenarios. And I'm just going to go back to the wizard to talk through the federation piece. Okay, here we are. Alrighty, move that over. Okay. So, thank you. So there's not a ton that's new for deploying ADFS. I think a lot of you, how many of you are ADFS experts in the room? Okay. So a lot of you, but some of you maybe would have this as news. Some of you not so much. I'm just going to go through quickly that we let you start with today. So today with DirSync and the existing set of tools, customers have to use PowerShell commandlets to, if they're using ADFS with Microsoft Online, use PowerShell commandlets to set that up. And so the new thing with the wizard is that sets that up for you and can actually deploy an entire farm from ADFS 2012 R2. You do need to supply the one certificate, only one, but you do need to have, which is the SSL certificate. So we ask for that in the PFX file. And that can be used, the same exact certificate, across all of your different nodes of your farm, including proxies. So we can allow that. And then, as a lot of you might have seen, the wizard prevents you from doing common mistakes people make, like naming their federation service with a host name, which is a bad configuration that we want to steer you away from. All right, so then I can add as many servers as I want to my farm. And then as many web application proxy servers as I want to my farm as well. I'm just going to do one for demo purposes here. And what this is doing, you'll notice we had the capability to add multiple forests at the Add Directories page. So which forest are we using for ADFS? Well, we're using one forest. So the scenario we support in the wizard for multiple forests is we assume you have Active Directory trust two-way amongst all those forests if you're using ADFS. Now, you don't have to have that, and there's a question there. I think we have a lot of content. I'm going to hang out here afterwards, and you can have question and answers. And so the ADFS will be deployed into the forest that you specify based on the servers that you specify for ADFS. So it's helpful if those are all in the same forest and actually recommend the same domain. So I'm going to go ahead and do this.
Do you want to show the picture?
Yeah, now I do, yeah. Okay, so we have a lot of pages and a lot of servers, and so just to orient you who haven't seen this before as far as how ADFS plays in a Microsoft Online scenario. So what we have just added on those two pages you've seen previously are, oops, a little pointer. Can I point? Does it work? No, this doesn't work. I didn't. All right, so up on the upper left, you can see you have Active Directory on-prem, and you have a federation service, a standard DMZ, and proxies. So all we've done is we've deployed those in that configuration. And there's an additional step we need to do, which has to do with how authentication works with Azure AD. So In a standard authentication flow with ADFS and Azure AD, our user is going to go to the Office 365 SaaS app, whatever the application resource is, and be redirected to Azure AD, specifically the STS in the sky within Azure AD, which is going to then redirect, say, hey, oh, this is a federated customer, and the identity provider, we call it, lives down on premises. So I'm now going to redirect that authentication request to the on-premises ADFS through the client. Generally speaking, this happens through the client. There's an exception around Exchange ActiveSync. But usually it's through the client, and he comes in through the web application proxy, and then in through the firewall to ADFS. So there's an additional proxy trust element that we have to configure when deploying ADFS. And that is what this page is all about. That little yellow arrow between web app proxy and ADFS needs to be bootstrapped with a credential. So if we can go back to the number 8.
Yes, it's there.
Oh, thank you. So I'm entering those credentials to enroll for my proxy trust. And this needs to be a domain administrator and local admin on your Federation server machine. So I'm going to put in my same old fancy Contoso administrator. All right. And then this page simply says, oh, I can create an account for ADFS to run as, and group managed service account is our default. But if you don't have the 2012 domain controller, you need at least one 2012 domain controller to use that option. You can specify a user account as well, and we let you do that. Oh, and by the way, all these little blue question marks you've been seeing throughout the wizard, we actually put help in those, and we actually did a lot of work to make those the appropriate information, high-level information, and then learn more links for more help for you to provide contextual help for that. So anytime while you're going through this, you can actually use those to figure out what is going on. And then this is a piece that replaces the Microsoft Online PowerShell steps we previously had to do. So this is reaching into my tenant, and it's allowing me to select one of my domains for Federation. Sync doesn't care about domain. It's just Federation that is doing this. But you can see that, for example, I picked a domain, and that domain is currently in a managed state. Means people are signing on with cloud passwords to that domain or synced passwords to that domain. So the wizard will actually warn me and let me know, oh, well, we can convert this domain for you. But since that's a change in configuration, you're going to have a period of time during which authentications won't work for a period of time. Similarly, if I have just set up my Federation, let's see if we can find him. Here we go. If I've just set up my custom domain and my DNS settings have not yet propagated, so it can't be verified, well, rather than letting it fail when we go to try to configure ADFS, we tell you that now, that this hasn't happened yet. And you need to go do that or wait for DNS to propagate. And then finally, if you're good and good to go, we just simply let you proceed. And then that's really it. Ready to configure means I'm just going to go ahead and configure all of the sync things that we elected, in addition to actually go out, deploy my ADFS farm, and configure the trust. We're going to talk a little bit more about what this staging mode option is when we go into the upgrade and migration section of the talk. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. And you can see it's zipping through a lot of these steps to enable my environment. And then there's one additional piece that we want you to do after the wizard, or before you get ready, but after we let you verify, which is to make sure your Federation service name resolves in DNS to your IP, your load balancer, or your farm. So that piece we don't do automatically for you, but we do check to see with the green verify button that that is ready for you. Can we go back to slides?
Yes, you see your slides.
Yep. OK, there's my clicker.
Where's your clicker?
So let's just go through the rest of this. And then this guy just shows user signing on. OK, so there are some things that the wizard does not do for you and that you need to do before. And it's pretty simple. For all scenarios, including express and custom settings, you need to make sure you have your Azure AD subscription, or your Office 365 subscription gets you that as well. So either one of those will work, and 30-day free trial is fine, or an actual subscription. And if you want custom domains, you should set those up and verify those as well. So because sync uses the, we'll need to make sure that your UPN suffixes map to a verified domain that you have in the cloud. So you need to set up that ahead of time. As well as, this is a big thing for a lot of organizations, is make sure your users have UPNs that map to the organizations and the domains that you have in the cloud. So that can be a very long process for a lot of customers. And today they use something called ID Fix to do that. This is a tool that is helpful today. And in the future, we're working to build more of the smarts of ID Fix into Sync proper so that you won't have to do that as a separate process. But it's still a separate tool today. And then just for ADFS scenarios like we went through in the demo, you need the SSL certificate. If you want to use the wizard to enable ADFS on a bunch of different servers in your organization, we use Windows Remote Management channel to do that. So you do need to enable that on all your ADFS and web app proxy targets you want to deploy via the wizard. You can turn it off later. We just need it for the deployment stage, but we do need that. And then we talked about the federation service name. So a couple of things that it's common to make sure you do after the wizard. And these are specific to ADFS, and I think that Andreas is going to talk through a lot of things specific to Sync. But from an ADFS perspective, it's very important that you ensure servers are up to date. Well, yeah, that's important generally. But just calling it out to you because there are a couple, in particular, the May 2014 Windows rollup, which contain fixes specific to ADFS. So we do resolve issues there, and you do want to make sure you're up to date. Second, ensure ADFS metadata is publicly available. Well, what the heck is that for? Well, metadata is an ADFS term, and it means that's where we publish information to relying party partners, Azure AD is one, about our federation service. So the main reason you need that is Azure AD will actually reach out to your metadata, your customer's metadata, to update certificates, token signing certificates when they roll over. Well, what's all this stuff about certificates? There's a ton of things we could say. We could talk for hours about the certificates and ADFS and what people need to do. But there's one thing that's high impact for your organization and for your customers, and that is that ADFS by default rolls over automatically the token signing certificate it uses. Azure AD needs to know about that certificate. So when that rollover happens, Azure AD needs to already know about it. So we have an automated, Azure AD has an automated service in the sky that reaches out to your metadata and pulls your new cert so you or your customer don't have to do that. There's a little window in there of time during which, and we can tell what that window is in the default settings, and we go in and we do that. And that saves customers having to worry about rolling over their certs and updating Azure AD. So we very much encourage you to avoid potentially outages that you use the default settings and make sure the metadata, and that is the default way with web application proxy that ADFS is configured, but just it's important for that reason. And then the next bullet feeds on that. For those of you who want to be more advanced, there is a configurable rollover interval in ADFS. There's a certificate generation threshold and then a certificate rollover interval. And those are set by default to a relatively tight amount of time. It's actually only 5 days between the time ADFS creates the new cert and starts using the new cert, which is the key thing for a cutoff. So you can actually change, and we're working to make our defaults a little bit more forgiving and all the impacts in the system on that. But you, in the meantime, can actually make that longer if you want to give folks 30 days, 90 days, however long, to make sure those things are rolled over. So that's something you can do. And then customizations of ADFS UI pages. We didn't get those into the wizard yet. Things like Federation Service Display Name, logo, we're working on that. You'll still need to do those easiest ways by PowerShell, and there's tons of documentation on how to do that. It's not too hard. And then SSO settings to provide your users with fewer prompts. We have something called KMSI, Keep Me Signed In. And SSO capabilities, it allows your users to have 24 hours of SSO on an unregistered device, admin configurable, period of no prompts on a registered device. So, and those are currently disabled by default. We don't enable those, so there's PowerShell that will enable you to set those up for a little easier user experience. Where did my clicker go?
I have that.
Okay.
Because the next slide is mine.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So with that, we have completed the customized path of Azure Active Directory Connect. So we walked you through the Express, we walked you through the Customize, but there's still a few more details we want to go through. So one is, how do I upgrade to this? So if you're using DirSync, which is quite many of you, actually, with AD Sync, we didn't allow you to upgrade from DirSync to AD Sync, but with AD Connect, we will do that. So if you're having less than 50,000 objects, we know that we can actually do an in-place upgrade. On the same box, we can do the import sync, etc. within the 3-hour window, so we'll actually do that. And what we'll do is actually an in-place migration, because we're actually different technology. So we actually read out all the configuration, all your OU settings, filtering on users, etc., and we migrate it over. It is actually we actually take more settings moving from DirSync to AD Connect than we keep if you move from one DirSync build to another DirSync build. So it should be really seamless to move from DirSync up to AD Connect. If you're having more than 50,000 objects, we know that's probably going to take more than 3 hours, and we don't want to interrupt the synchronization. And that, you remember I said earlier, there's something called import settings. So in that case, what you'll do is you start AD Connect on your DirSync box. That will give you the same configuration file, all your configuration, OU set, etc., and you copy it over to a new machine. And now, when you install AD Connect, where you saw the import settings, you just give us that configuration file. And now, when you start using the sync engine, you will get exactly the same configuration you had on your previous DirSync. So basically, it's doing a stage migration. From Azure Directory Sync is just an in-place upgrade. To be honest, all I did when we changed from Azure Directory Sync to Azure Directory Connect Sync, I changed a few control panel names, and then I was done. So it is really building on the same technology. Whatever market is going to call it next year, I have no idea. But I'm working on the sync engine. I know how to rebrand the product. So staging mode. So Jen talked about staging mode as a checkbox. So what is that? And this is actually making sure, this is a best practice been for many years, to have a server just doing import to synchronization and not running export. And there are two reasons for that. So one is the migration scenario we just talked about. I'm setting up a new machine in parallel, and I want to do import and sync, and I want to look at the new data before I export it to make sure I'm not doing anything weird. It could be I missed a configuration setting or something wasn't migrated. In this case, I can make sure I can look at all the configuration options. There's another reason, and it is warm standby. And it is I'm really concerned about being down for a while. And in this case, I can have a server in staging mode in a different data center with its own database. And it's always doing the import and synchronization. It's always up to speed. But in case of disaster recovery, I just launch the wizard on my second box. I disable staging mode, and then that machine will take over to be the active one. And what's actually happening under the covers is we make sure we don't run exports, we don't do password synchronization, we don't do password writeback, even though these have been configured. So we make sure it's only one machine that is actively exporting to Azure Active Directory at a time. We didn't have this with DirSync, we didn't have this with AD Sync, but we're adding that as a supported option with AD Connect. Export deletion threshold, that is if my clicker works. So something that has been a problem for some of you is you accidentally deleted slightly too many objects, and it ends up in a support call because your entire Azure directory have been deleted. Usually it's been a configuration error, but now with Azure Directory Connect, we actually enable this setting by default. It was actually setting that was available in DirSync. No one used it. It was not in the wizard. If you didn't find the documentation, you had no idea it was there. But now it's actually enabled by default. So with default, that is that if, before we start running an export, we'll look at what is about to be exported. If there are more than 500 deletes, that's a default value, we'll actually stop the export. We'll send you the email saying, something wrong, go investigate. And there's two possible outcomes. Either everything is good, then just disable the feature, you run the export, and you enable it again. Or you say, oh my goodness, it was not expected. Someone changed my configuration. Well, obviously you go and fix the configuration. In that case, resync and everything is good. So if you're starting to see these emails, then you know what it is. You can also obviously use the PowerShell command to change the setting. If 500 is not a good value for you, then just go and change the setting. And this is stored in the cloud. So even if you're using this the staging server I talked about, the setting will actually move between the servers in that case. You don't have to run this on every server. So Jen talked a little bit of the different credentials. Just to be absolutely sure we understand what the different credentials are. So you need a global admin credential for connecting to Azure Active Directory. But, as I'm going to talk about on the next slide, we're actually, and this is different from both AD Sync and DirSync, we're actually not using a global admin credential for actually exporting and importing. When we are doing express settings, you give us an enterprise admin account, and we will create a service account just as we did in DOSIG. When it comes to on-premise or the custom, you will actually do the work for us. You create a service account in your forest and just provide the credentials. The Azure Directories service account is a new concept. And as Jen mentioned earlier, or hinted to earlier, it's been a lot of confusion, a lot of feedback. The first one, hey, the best practice is to create an account with a strong password, not expires, and you require it to be global admin. No, I don't think so. So we introduced a new role in Azure Active Directory, a directory synchronization role. If you look in the Azure portal, you show up as other. That means this is not something you really can control from the portal. It's actually locked down from the portal. The Azure portal cannot handle or cannot manage our service accounts by design. You can't delete it by accident. So the only way to actually manage these new accounts is through PowerShell commandlets that comes with Azure Active Directory Connect. The PowerShell commandlets and portals account with Azure, by design, will not be able to manage the new service account that is created in Azure Active Directory. Yep. All right, so that was for the sync engine.
Yep. And we actually have only about 14 minutes left. I want to make sure you guys get to our topic for Azure AD Connect Health in our third demo. So I'm actually going to go through and zoom through some of these stuff. It's not as interesting for you. And make sure we talk about this. So we have this thing called Azure AD Connect Health, which is a new member of the Connect family, right? So we are able to check the health and how is your connection doing after you've set it up, and do a bunch of other things as well. So just a quick note about this. I'm going to show you today Azure AD Connect Health for ADFS, because we currently have that out in preview. But just know that we're also planning Azure AD Connect Health for Sync, and to have that, and to have health for all of your different aspects of your connection. So, so we will see that. Okay, so I've set up ADFS, and I want to see how it's doing. I want to know, for example, 3 things. Is my configuration complete and up to date? How am I doing from a capacity utilization perspective? And is there anything strange or dodgy going on in my environment that I might want to look at from a forensic perspective? So let's go ahead to the demo machine, number 7. Okay, so here I have Azure AD Connect Health. And so this is in the new style of management portal UI that you might have seen in our Azure AD portal. So let me tell you how I got here. I got here from the home page. I had to first go to the marketplace and search for health. And then I can add that to my home page. But once I click that, I end up here. And in this environment, we're actually looking at our team's internal environment, so it's a little weird. We have 4 farms. You will probably only have 1 farm. So I'm going to go ahead and click that farm, and that reveals this panel over here. So this is a panel of farm information. So let's see what we have here. Okay, so I have the overview section where I can basically just see that I have 3 federation servers and 3 proxies. I can see information about those servers over here on the right-hand side, and I can see things like properties. Okay, fine, I can see my version, my certs, not too interesting. Informational, right? But what is there that I need to really take action on that's happening in my farm? So for that, I go to the alerts area. And so that's going to reveal a new panel. So what is Azure AD Connect Health? It actually runs. We run an agent on each of your servers on-prem that does 2 things. It looks at the existing instrumentation that components may have, event logs, audits, things like that. But it also does transactions and checks for specific things that might go wrong. And it actually sends those up to Azure AD with your permission and your opt-in, and allows Azure AD to generate these reports for you. So let's just look at a couple examples of things. There's kind of a lot going on in this environment, it being a test environment. So just to click on a few of these. ADFS auditing is disabled. This lets you know because our usage analytics feed on the auditing capability and audit logs of ADFS. So that piece will be empty if you don't have that, and this is letting you know that with all sorts of guidance. Latest hotfixes rollups. Remember I mentioned this in the ADFS section, is you want to make sure you're up to date. So this will actually tell me if I'm missing any QFBs, updates, or rollups that I need, and which ones those are, and which nodes are missing those. So that's information to have, definitely. And then finally, third example, I mentioned this, token signing certificates. This one happens to be telling me that my certificate is about to expire within 90 days. That's a little more warning than those default thresholds give you, so it's kind of a nice thing. And you can go in, and it gives you all sorts of steps and links to our latest guidance on how to deal with that. Okay, so that's alerts. So let's go into how our capacity utilization is going. And so for that, we go to monitoring. So I'm going to monitor here, and the default view is showing me token requests per second. That's a very familiar perfmon counter to all of you ADFS experienced folks out there. And so this is going to fill in details in the detailed panel here, and it's basically showing me the throughput of token requests per second across all of the different servers in my farm, federation servers, and proxies. And I can actually right-click and edit this chart to look at different pivots and different types of information. I can change the time range to look for more or less of a time window, and I can look at different metrics. For example, the memory and processor percent consumption across all my farm, TCP connections, et cetera. All sorts of different things there to find out how am I doing with my capacity planning, do I need to add more nodes, et cetera. So then I can go back and scroll down to the third item, which is usage. How is my farm actually being used? And what this donut is telling me is, it's a little hard to read in the default here, but these are all my relying parties in ADFS. So the top one here is actually the Microsoft Online relying party application in ADFS. So the donut is telling me that 58.7% of my application visits in the last 24 hours were for Microsoft Online. And then I have these other applications here that relatively fewer people are using. And then there's a detail pane for this as well, where I can edit and actually look at different pivots here. Changing the time window, as we've mentioned, but also things like failed requests. I can see, okay, why are people failing? What by error type? Is it failed password? Is it locked user? Is it something else? And from what network location and from what relying party are we failing? So this just helps me see, okay, how are my users doing and what in general is going on in my system? And if something looks amiss, we'd be able to point it out there. Now, the third thing on this list, let me just close out of this. I don't have to. The third thing here, down at the bottom, is reports. So for example, bad password attempts. So this is where it starts getting into more of a forensic and analytics side. Thank you. Mine is too, right? And yours, I'm sure. So you can see, and this is actually the last thing, you can see who is signing on with bad password attempts. And so it gives you a list of your top 50 users by default here of bad password. You can see this guy called Health Admin has a failed attempt 10,000 times. Well, okay, that's probably, in our world, it's probably a test account or some automated process that's going on. So you really want to establish your baseline so that you can use these reports effectively to see if something is different from what you expect from a behavior perspective to help you look into that. But so that was pretty much Azure AD Connect Health, and he just turned off. So there we go. And then how are we on time? Are we over time? Okay. So how does it work? Like I said, it's an agent on every machine that runs, sends information to the cloud. Usage feeds on your security audit logs. And so I think I showed you all of these things in the demo. And one more. OK, closing and features.
All right, so we are almost done with the session. I'm glad you actually you're here. We still have 5 more minutes. So I'm just going to finish off with this final things. The most common questions is licensing. And this is actually following the Azure Active Directory license. That means that if you look at it from a syncing perspective, it's free, effectively. And to make it really simple, if you're synchronizing something from on-prem to the cloud, it's free. If it's being synchronized from the cloud back to on-prem, it's Azure Directory Premium, with the exception of Hybrid Exchange, which was free in DoorSync, so it is still free both in AD Sync and AD Connect. SQL obviously would require, if you have more than 100,000 objects, you need to read SQL Server. Well, you still need a SQL Server license in that case. For roadmap, we're certainly doing more things. So here's a list of things we are working on already, both what we're doing for the wizard to add more and more scenarios, and certainly for more of these federation scenarios, as you can see. But also in the sync engine, we're moving on adding support for LDAP systems that are directly in the wizard. Health for sync engine, Jen showed you that for federation. We make sure we can do the same thing for sync, and also more robustness. A common problem is I have duplicate UPNs. I have duplicate proxy addresses in my on-prem Active Directory. Today we tell you, run idfix, go fix your data. We are working on making sure you don't have to fix the data up front. we actually synchronize the data initially, and then you can go and clean up the data later. It makes it a lot easier to start onboarding and start testing the features than spending 2 months just go and clean up your own Active Directory. And with that, we have a bunch of related content, obviously. Is this something in particular? We already talked about the Windows 10 session on Friday. Also, if you want to know more about Premium, we have that as a session directly after lunch. And actually, they have changed my slide on me. So the Azure Directory sweepstakes. So if you have no idea, it's actually a challenge. So there's a session code you need to enter that you're actually been here, and then you can win. When I looked at it this yesterday, if you just had been at one of these sessions, you're one of the top 50 people. So there's actually a great chance to win in this Azure challenge. This is also explaining, if you go to that page, it also explains what you do, why you're collecting all these stickers on your badge. That will also explain all that. So with that, we would like to thank you. Please evaluate. We'll stay here for questions. Obviously, I take synchrony questions, Jen take federation questions. We also have help from Sam here, who will also take questions. Thank you a lot, and I hope you enjoyed the session.
Thank you, everybody, for your time today.